It was a humid November night in 2022 inside a $40 million penthouse in the Albany luxury resort in the Bahamas. But nobody in the room was sleeping. A handful of 20-something executives sat huddled over brightly lit monitor screens, their knuckles white and hands trembling as they watched financial figures plummeting across internal balance sheets. Urgent red warnings flashed relentlessly across signal channels and internal dashboards, while strained, panicked voices echoed through the glass-walled room. The master balance sheet on their laptops was disintegrating in real time, exposing a gaping $8 billion liquidity deficit as a massive wave of customer withdrawal requests overwhelmed the platform's actual cash and crypto reserves. The panic radiated across desks and hallways as the inner circle realized that their vast corporate empire was fundamentally insolvent. The financial backstop they had advertised to the world was a hollow illusion, built entirely on inflated house tokens, leaving customer liabilities massively underfunded and signaling a catastrophic breach of elementary fiduciary duty. To comprehend the sheer scale of the panic unfolding inside that tropical sanctuary, you must understand how a legitimate financial institution is supposed to handle customer funds. When retail investors deposit their hard-earned dollars or digital assets onto a custodial platform like FTX, those holdings must be treated as segregated property held safely inside individual custodial vaults. A compliant exchange operates on an explicit contractual promise that customer funds remain untouched, fully backed one-to-one, and available for immediate withdrawal at any second. In a transparent financial ecosystem, exchange operators do not trade against their users, rehypothecate deposited capital, or leverage client assets to finance external high-stakes corporate gambles. Yet behind the sleek, dark mode user interface and glowing corporate branding, those customer vaults had been secretly hollowed out for years. Through hidden lines of automated software code, executive management quietly diverted billions in user deposits directly into their private, highly leveraged trading vehicle to underwrite aggressive speculative trades and illiquid venture investments. Long before those tropical computer monitors flashed red, the architect of this system was a young man named Sam Bankman-Fried, raised on the campus of Stanford University and obsessed with high-stakes strategy games. As a boy, he would stay up through the early morning hours mastering complex mathematical puzzles and probability theory that bewildered his peers. He deliberately rejected the outward appearance of conventional Wall Street executives, wearing frayed cargo shorts, faded t-shirts, and scuffed sneakers while allowing his dark curls to grow into a wild halo. He spoke in rapid, staccato bursts, slept on beanbag chairs beside his desk, and convinced sophisticated investors that his mind operated on an elite mathematical plane. That engineered image of unpretentious brilliance convinced marquee venture capital firms, including Sequoia Capital, SoftBank, and Paradigm, that he was an ungreedy genius who had completely transcended personal vanity. During high-stakes Series B and Series C fundraising calls, he played video games on camera, which investors wildly misconstrued as a mark of supreme intellectual dominance. As he reached adulthood, Sam became a prominent disciple of effective altruism, a philosophical movement championed by academic moral philosophers like Will MacAskill. The core principle was earning to give, which dictated that an individual should aggressively maximize personal wealth creation, not for private luxury, but to deploy every spare dollar towards systemic global catastrophe prevention. He treated personal ethics like a giant utilitarian equation, convincing himself that accumulating unchecked financial power was a moral imperative to solve global existential threats. This extreme risk-neutral philosophy meant that a tiny mathematical probability of achieving immense utility was used to justify taking catastrophic financial risks that conventional leaders would immediately recognize as profoundly unethical. This high-minded moral framework granted his aggressive expansionist tactics a dangerous cloak of ideological virtue that systematically disarmed regulators and journalists alike. By directing millions toward political campaigns, academic institutes, and high-profile philanthropic causes, he bought immense political access and constructed a pristine public reputation that masked severe structural deficiencies inside his companies. When an executive fully convinces themselves that their ultimate mission serves a transcendent global good, overriding fundamental regulatory and moral constraints becomes dangerously simple. A founder can justify falsifying books, misleading audit firms, and quietly misappropriating funds today by telling themselves that these tactical compromises will deliver massive ethical returns to humanity tomorrow. Slowly and methodically, the boundary separating ambitious corporate strategy from outright financial fraud dissolves entirely, leaving corporate leadership completely detached from their basic legal obligations. The decision-makers inside the apparatus cease to recognize the immense economic destruction they are engineering, viewing real-world human casualties as mere temporary rounding errors within a grand, theoretical balance sheet. This distorted psychological feedback loop established the exact ideological foundation for an unprecedented corporate autopsy. By combining unchecked executive authority, a completely absent board of directors, zero independent audit oversight, and total investor deference, the organization created an explosive operational environment where eventual collapse was not merely possible but mathematically inevitable. Years before launching FTX, Sam initiated his financial career by founding his first trading firm, Alameda Research, inside a cramped, chaotic apartment in Berkeley, California. The living room was crammed with tangled Ethernet cables, whiteboards covered in quantitative trading formulas, and trading desks smelling perpetually of stale takeout containers and cold coffee. A tight-knit crew of young, intense quantitative traders worked grueling 18-hour shifts around the clock, hunting for fleeting arbitrage opportunities across fragmented global markets. They famously exploited the Japanese kimchi premium, moving tens of millions of dollars through complex international banking corridors between Asia and the United States to net enormous daily trading profits. They convinced themselves they were building the future of automated global finance, but the complete lack of operational controls inside that Berkeley apartment presaged the disaster ahead. Missing wire transfer records, non-existent corporate treasuries, and a total absence of accounting software were obscured by rapid profits, establishing the exact fraudulent habits that would destroy tens of billions. In November 2017, Alameda Research built its foundational fortune on a remarkably simple market inefficiency known as the kimchi premium. Bitcoin was trading at nearly 30% higher on Japanese and South Korean exchanges compared to prices in the United States. Sam Bankman-Fried and a tiny circle of Berkeley graduates spied a localized structural anomaly that institutional Wall Street desks had largely written off as unworkable. They executed a relentless arbitrage playbook, wiring millions of dollars through international banking channels, buying cheap Bitcoin in California and selling it instantaneously in Tokyo. This mechanical trading strategy extracted upwards of $25 million in net profit every single week with virtually zero market directional exposure, creating an illusory money printer inside a bare-bones apartment office in Berkeley. That immediate, intoxicating deluge of friction-free yield warped the psychology of the young quantitative traders, convincing them that standard risk controls and basic double-entry bookkeeping were outdated relic concepts from traditional banking. They concluded that standard corporate governance, audited financial statements, and real-time ledger accounting were entirely optional for financial prodigies who had solved the market on their very first try. By late 2018, however, the structural arbitrage dried up, as competing algorithmic trading firms swept into the space and squeezed profit margins down to basis points. The easy money vanished, leaving Alameda with massive fixed overhead costs, high-interest loans from institutional crypto lenders, and an increasingly sophisticated competitive landscape that exposed the firm's fundamental lack of real hedging strategy. Rather than accepting market reality, Alameda began bleeding tens of millions of dollars on speculative directional bets, unhedged altcoin purchases, and illiquid venture investments. When court filings later revealed these devastating losses, they showed that instead of executing an orderly wind-down or coming clean to creditors, Sam chose to obscure the drawdowns through fraudulent balance sheet manipulations and off-book accounting entries. Falsifying those severe operational drawdowns pushed the entire enterprise past a point of non-return, converting what should have been a standard venture capital restructuring into a concealed, toxic black hole. By sweeping realized trading losses under the rug, the leadership team implicitly committed themselves to an ongoing systemic campaign of accounting fraud to stay solvent. The psychological toll on Sam Bankman-Fried was compound and severe. Silicon Valley venture capitalists and financial media outlets had rapidly anointed him as an untouchable generational financial genius, making any public admission of a multi-million-dollar trading drawdown feel like an intolerable, fatal blow to his carefully crafted persona. Enmeshed in a claustrophobic echo chamber of unearned deference and effective altruism rhetoric, the terror of public exposure dictated his every decision. To protect his carefully manufactured image as a benevolent billionaire, Sam prioritized silent, systematic deceit over corporate transparency, resolving to gamble his way out of a worsening balance sheet insolvency. That fundamental refusal to accept failure triggered an escalating cascade of illegal shortcuts that quickly metastasized through every organ of his growing financial kingdom. The hidden hole in Alameda's balance sheet became the silent driver behind every strategic move, setting the stage for an unprecedented breach of global institutional trust. It remains staggering how quickly retail investors and sophisticated venture capital partners surrendered billions of dollars to a young man who deliberately cultivated an unkempt aesthetic of oversized t-shirts and cargo shorts. They saw a math prodigy who claimed to care nothing for material wealth, publicly promising to donate his entire future fortune to philanthropic causes through the lens of effective altruism. In the fast-moving, loosely regulated wilderness of digital assets, narrative authority routinely eclipsed basic balance sheet due diligence. Millions of ordinary depositors mistook carefully orchestrated public relations for regulatory compliance, trusting that their hard-earned life savings were sitting safely inside segregated custodian accounts. That massive, unearned reservoir of global trust supplied the political and financial capital Sam needed to launch his crowning venture in May 2019. He moved operations from California to Hong Kong, laying the structural groundwork for an institutional cryptocurrency trading hub built specifically to capture massive global trading volume. He co-founded FTX, marketing the venue as a next-generation derivatives exchange engineered by real traders for real traders. The platform boasted a high-throughput matching engine capable of processing microsecond trades, complete with advanced liquidation engines, custom leverage options, and an ultra-sleek user interface designed to dwarf legacy competitors like BitMEX and Binance. Capital poured in instantly from all corners of the global market, ranging from elite Wall Street quantitative funds and venture titans like Sequoia Capital to millions of individual retail users opening mobile accounts. These depositors believed they were putting their funds into the world's most secure, highly regulated, and liquid financial engine. The explosive, meteoric rise of FTX transformed the enterprise into a household global brand practically overnight. The firm bought long-term stadium naming rights in Miami, purchased multi-million-dollar Super Bowl advertising spots, and secured endorsements from iconic celebrity athletes to project an aura of bulletproof institutional authority. Yet the entire marketing apparatus rested on a strict, explicit promise written directly into the exchange's core terms of service. FTX publicly pledged that user deposits belonged strictly to the customer, promising that client fiat and digital assets would remain fully backed and segregated from exchange liabilities at all times. Executive leadership repeatedly assured regulators, auditors, and the public that customer assets were completely isolated from Alameda Research's trading desk, swearing under penalty of law that those funds would never be commingled, hypothecated, or deployed into speculative investments. Millions of account holders took those solemn regulatory and contractual pledges at face value, leaving billions of dollars on the platform. They had no way of knowing that behind the gleaming dashboard, a secret backdoor in the code base was already siphoning their deposits directly into Alameda's hemorrhaging bank accounts. Deep inside the air-conditioned server rooms in 2019, FTX created a brand new financial instrument out of thin air. They decided to mint their own proprietary crypto asset, naming it the FTT token. They did not back it with gold, sovereign debt, or cash reserves. They simply executed a routine software script, instantly creating tens of millions of brand new digital tokens on an internal ledger. Almost immediately, executives assigned an arbitrarily inflated price tag to these newly created assets. They reported on internal balance sheets that each token carried immense value long before any active secondary market existed to test that hypothesis. It was the financial equivalent of drawing a billion-dollar denomination on a scrap of paper and convincing institutional lenders that it constituted liquid reserves. Once these synthetic tokens were registered on the books, corporate insiders began treating them exactly like hard cash. They transferred massive blocks of FTT onto internal balance sheets, treating this self-issued paper as legitimate equity. That manufactured asset base was then leveraged to obtain real cash loans from unsuspecting institutional creditors and decentralized lending protocols across the entire industry. Consider a casino where the house prints its own private plastic chips in secret, assigning them a value of $10,000 each without placing real cash in the vault. As long as every player at the table accepts the illusion without demanding to cash out, the system appears absurdly solvent. But the exact moment a major player demands hard currency, the entire house of cards collapses. FTX leadership continually assured global markets that their enterprise held tens of billions of dollars in enterprise value, largely pointing to these massive piles of FTT tokens. Yet the vast majority of the token supply sat locked inside their own private corporate wallets. Had they attempted to liquidate even a small fraction of those tokens on the open market, the spot price would have plunged straight to zero. This engineered a dangerous accounting fantasy, a multi-billion-dollar empire built almost entirely on paper wealth that could evaporate in minutes if market participants ever demanded actual fiat currency. The financial statements projected immense strength, but behind the scenes, the balance sheet was crammed with toxic, highly illiquid self-minted assets that possessed zero actual market depth when tested under distress. The most astonishing failure was that almost nobody in power audited the vault. Legendary venture capital funds like Sequoia, sophisticated private equity firms, and high-profile regulators looked at superficial revenue numbers and nodded approvingly. They met a charismatic founder in cargo shorts and assumed his technical genius exempted him from basic corporate governance and traditional financial accounting practices. Not a single major investor demanded a rigorous, independent audit of where real customer funds were maintained. Wall Street executives were so captivated by skyrocketing crypto valuations and promises of algorithmic yields that they abandoned standard due diligence. Blind greed and institutional fear of missing out caused grown professionals to suspend basic skepticism and trust an unverified corporate narrative. While the public focused on glossy marketing campaigns, celebrity endorsements, and stadium naming rights, a far darker mechanism was taking shape inside the core computer systems. Behind the polished user interface, the technical architecture was being deliberately manipulated to bypass traditional exchange safeguards and facilitate an unprecedented siphon of capital away from retail depositors. Late at night in 2020, core software engineers were directed to write custom modifications directly into the codebase of the trading engine. This was no accidental software bug or system oversight. It was a deliberate, hard-coded backdoor engineered specifically to grant elevated permissions to an internal entity while keeping those special privileges hidden from external auditors and ordinary platform users. This hidden code granted the sister hedge fund, Alameda Research, an extraordinary immunity from the platform's automatic liquidation algorithms. While ordinary retail accounts faced automated position liquidations if losses breached specific margin thresholds, Alameda was granted a secret $65 billion line of credit. The safety switches were permanently disabled, allowing Alameda to run massive, unbacked negative balances without triggering alarms. That single line of custom computer code violated every regulatory disclosure, marketing claim, and legal term of service FTX had ever published. It transformed what purported to be an impartial, high-speed matching engine into a rigged financial trough, allowing a single connected entity to quietly bleed the exchange of liquidity whenever its external market bets went sideways. When everyday retail traders, working families, and institutional clients deposited their hard-earned funds onto FTX, they assumed their capital remained isolated in segregated custodial accounts. They believed their cash sat securely inside institutional banking partner vaults, ready for withdrawal at a moment's notice. Instead, back-end automated wire transfers quietly redirected incoming customer deposits straight into bank accounts controlled entirely by Alameda Research. Customer funds and proprietary trading capital were commingled into a single, chaotic financial bucket without internal accounting controls. There was no functional boundary dividing customer deposits from high-risk hedge fund bets. While users logged into their apps and viewed digital balances that appeared completely safe, their capital was already being deployed into speculative venture investments and volatile token markets halfway across the world. This routine commingling of customer assets created an insidious multi-billion-dollar hole in the exchange balance sheet long before the public suspected a problem. Billions in user capital had simply vanished from the primary exchange, replaced by worthless internal IOU entries that relied entirely on market prices remaining perpetually high to avoid discovery during redemptions. When the crypto market crashed in 2022 and market liquidity dried up across the sector, Alameda Research suffered catastrophic trading losses on volatile digital assets. Rather than declaring bankruptcy or disclosing the deficits to investors, leadership doubled down on the fraud. They tapped deeper into the commingled pool of customer deposits, stealing billions more to satisfy demanding margin calls from external lenders. Stolen customer savings were siphoned off to purchase tens of millions of dollars in luxury real estate across the Bahamas, fund massive political donations to buy regulatory influence, and subsidize wild venture bets. It became a frantic, snowballing illusion where leadership burned through institutional trust and user funds at a record pace, frantically attempting to maintain the appearance of liquid solvency. They operated under the desperate belief that if they continued projecting absolute dominance, sponsoring sports arenas, and promising endless future growth, the market would never test their balance sheet. They assumed that as long as the music kept playing, no one would ever step forward and demand to convert those digital account balances back into real physical cash. The weight of a secret becomes heavier with every passing second. By late 2021, Alameda Research had quietly drawn billions of dollars from a secret liabilities backdoor built directly into the FTX exchange architecture. As the silent hole on the corporate balance sheet swelled toward $10 billion, maintaining the public illusion of pristine solvency grew terrifyingly precarious. Inside the company walls at the luxury Albany Resort penthouse in Nassau, the quiet halls began to feel heavy. Key executive insiders, including Bankman-Fried, Caroline Ellison, Gary Wang, and Nishad Singh, communicated through auto-deleting signal messages. Every sudden market dip or public query sounded like the exact moment their multi-billion-dollar commingling scheme would detonate before global regulators. While hiding such a dark truth creates constant fear, it also creates a financial death trap where missing money forces even bigger lies to keep the doors open. As the broader crypto market cratered in mid-2022, Alameda faced aggressive margin calls from institutional lenders like Genesis and BlockFi, forcing the firm to siphon even more FTX customer deposits to cover bad trades. Did Sam Bankman-Fried and his close executive inner circle really believe they could make all the missing money back before anyone noticed? Or did they know they were committing outright financial fraud and simply could not stop themselves? They operated under the absurd delusion that their quantitative trading strategies and speculative digital tokens, like FTT, would magically recover in value. Inside their own minds, they might have convinced themselves that they were only borrowing customer funds for a short-term liquidity crunch. By routing funds through an obscure bank entity named North Dimension, Bankman-Fried rationalized that taking $8 billion of depositor funds was a temporary operational necessity, fully justified by his grand visions of long-term global influence and effective altruism. Believing in their own magic trick made them bolder, blinding them to the terrible danger they were building for innocent retail depositors. FTX embarked on a reckless, multi-million-dollar global marketing blitz, securing naming rights for the Miami NBA arena, signing celebrity endorsements, funding political campaigns in Washington, and buying out distressed competitors, all paid for with misappropriated customer capital. Far away from the daily chaos in the Bahamas, rich adult investors from famous venture capital firms sat in high-glass offices along Sand Hill Road. Tech titans at Sequoia Capital, Temasek Holdings, Paradigm, and SoftBank looked at Sam Bankman-Fried and saw a visionary financial prodigy who was going to make their institutional investment funds richer than ever before. These powerful leaders were so excited by the promise of massive future EBITDA and global market dominance that they stopped asking simple, critical questions. Driven by an intense fear of missing out, venture capital partners scrambled to join the exclusive funding round, desperate to claim a slice of an exchange rapidly approaching a staggering $32 billion valuation. Their blind excitement turned into total trust, opening the door for a catastrophic financial failure to grow unchecked behind closed doors. By granting FTX their prestigious institutional stamp of approval, blue-chip venture funds provided Bankman-Fried with an unearned mantle of absolute credibility, convincing mainstream markets that his sprawling empire was thoroughly vetted, secure, and invincible. Normally, institutional investors perform strict fiduciary due diligence, which means carefully checking bank books, verifying actual cash reserves, and auditing structural risk controls. But in this case, these famous venture capital experts completely skipped those basic checks, failing to demand even a formal board of directors to oversee Bankman-Fried's absolute, unchecked control over corporate assets. Instead of sending independent top-tier auditors to inspect real operational accounting records, they relied on informal pitch decks and casual promises. They handed over hundreds of millions of dollars to a complex international operation that used basic QuickBooks software and scattered messaging channels to track billions in capital, completely missing Alameda's unlimited credit line on the FTX exchange. Failing to do basic diligence left over 1 million regular depositors completely unprotected when the truth finally surfaced. Retail traders across the globe placed their hard-earned life savings into FTX accounts, trusting that elite Silicon Valley venture firms had fulfilled their basic oversight responsibilities, completely unaware that customer funds were actively backing Alameda's high-risk speculative trading strategies. During one high-stakes pitch meeting over a video call, Bankman-Fried actually played a fast-paced League of Legends computer game right on his screen while pitching top venture capital partners. Instead of getting angry at his blatant disrespect, the rich investors convinced themselves that his furious mouse-clicking was definitive proof of a hyper-intelligent genius who could multitask effortlessly while pitching grand strategies. He clicked his mouse furiously while asking for hundreds of millions of dollars in Series B funding, rarely even looking into the camera lens. The venture partners at Sequoia Capital were so hypnotized by his unusual confidence that they approved a $210 million investment, later publishing a glowing article declaring Bankman-Fried a future world leader and potential trillionaire. Treating serious financial deals like a playground game showed just how far venture capital culture had drifted from basic common sense. In the speculative euphoria of 2021, sophisticated financiers abandoned fundamental corporate governance, mistaking juvenile detachment and a complete lack of internal controls for brilliant disruption, leaving multi-billion-dollar global financial infrastructure completely unanchored by economic reality. It is shocking to see how easily smart, grown-up institutional experts can be tricked when they get blinded by the promise of easy riches. It proves that prestigious job titles, Ivy League degrees, and managing billions in assets do not mean someone is exercising sound judgment, performing rigorous financial analysis, or verifying the underlying truth of a corporate pitch. Greed can make the most experienced financial leaders in the world act completely blind, choosing to ignore glaring structural red flags because they want to believe in a profitable fairy tale. Critical warnings about missing financial records, opaque offshore entities, and extreme concentration of power were deliberately swept aside in the mad rush to secure astronomical returns. When greed replaces careful thinking, the stage is set for an inevitable collapse that devastates everyone involved. Beneath the glowing media profiles and artificial multi-billion-dollar valuation, FTX was operating as a giant, insolvent house of cards, waiting for the very first sign of a liquidity run to expose the massive fraud and destroy billions in market value. When court-appointed restructuring officer John J. Ray III took over the wreckage, he discovered that a financial empire valued at $32 billion after its Series C funding round in January 2022 did not even maintain a centralized employee roster. There were no audited financial statements, no traditional enterprise resource planning systems, and no professional corporate structure. Instead, executives tracked multi-million-dollar transactions on casual Slack channels and off-the-shelf QuickBooks software. To ensure no permanent paper trail survived internal scrutiny, key leadership configured their primary communication apps, including Signal, to automatically delete messages after brief intervals. Vital corporate records, transaction histories, and board authorizations evaporated into digital air, concealing the reality from institutional investors like Sequoia Capital and Temasek. It was an international financial conglomerate with billions in daily volume operating with less administrative rigor than a corner retail storefront. When basic accounting controls and audit trails vanish, institutional accountability disappears along with them. This intentional absence of structural oversight provided the perfect cover for executive leadership to dismantle their Asian operational footprint. By September 2021, the entire core management team prepared to pack up their digital infrastructure and physically relocate their multi-billion-dollar enterprise across the Atlantic Ocean. Chief Executive Sam Bankman-Fried and his inner circle of young managers transplanted the entire operation to the sunny shores of New Providence in the Bahamas. They purchased a sprawling $30 million luxury penthouse within the ultra-exclusive Albany resort community overlooking the Caribbean. Warm, tropical winds swept through oceanfront balconies while executives looked out over turquoise waters, miles away from Wall Street oversight. This isolated island sanctuary allowed the young leadership team to operate completely insulated from aggressive regulatory scrutiny by agencies like the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. The physical move created a closed corporate ecosystem where corporate governance was ignored, standard human resources protocols were dismissed, and basic fiduciary duty simply ceased to exist. Residing together inside a gated tropical enclave transformed a financial management team into an insular, secretive cabal. Completely removed from the watchful eyes of international regulators, the absence of independent oversight rapidly accelerated their most dangerous financial habits. Without internal compliance officers or a functioning board of directors to restrain them, executive spending quickly escalated into unchecked corporate extravagance. More than $250 million diverted from customer deposits was spent acquiring over 30 prime real estate properties across the Bahamas. Private jet charter services were routinely commissioned at immense cost just to transport personal packages, paper towels, and luxury goods directly from Florida airports. Extravagant catered dining, expensive electronics, and generous personal loans were dispersed to favored insiders without documented loan agreements. Internal expense reimbursements were approved through informal chat messages, where managers simply responded with custom thumbs-up emojis instead of invoices or receipts. Retail customer savings held in trust were systematically siphoned off to finance an opulent lifestyle under the Caribbean sun, while accountants dutifully categorized tens of millions in personal expenditures as legitimate corporate operating expenses. Every $1 million spent on private aviation, luxury villas, and political donations belonged to everyday retail depositors who believed their assets were safely segregated in secure custodial accounts. In reality, the growing deficit between public customer balances and secret corporate expenditures widened every single day, creating an ever-expanding black hole on the consolidated corporate balance sheet. Shielded by private security teams, manicured palm trees, and gated perimeters, the executive group convinced themselves they were entirely beyond the reach of traditional financial laws. They shared lavish nightly dinners, mocked external critics, and operated within a bubble of supreme self-assurance. The isolated island setting made the realities of international securities laws feel thousands of miles away. Within this sun-drenched paradise, standard legal consequences appeared to vanish entirely. As sunlight reflected off private penthouse swimming pools, the executive team operated under the delusion that old-world financial rules were outdated relics belonging to a traditional banking system they had outsmarted, replacing sound risk management with total institutional hubris. This profound psychological detachment from financial reality made catastrophic risk-taking feel completely inconsequential to the young executives. The comforting illusion of total invincibility created a toxic environment of uncritical groupthink within the Albany penthouse, where catastrophic leverage and unhedged market exposure were treated as routine components of daily corporate operational strategy. When a chief executive surrounds himself exclusively with dependent subordinates and close personal friends, critical dissent is entirely extinguished. Inside the penthouse, no one questioned dubious trade executions, challenged multi-billion-dollar balance sheet gaps, or audited intercompany transfers. Subordinates routinely nodded in agreement, rubber-stamping every financial proposal put forward by Sam Bankman-Fried without hesitation. Without independent directors, external auditors, or seasoned risk officers to raise alarms, absurd financial gambles went entirely unchecked. The total absence of a single authoritative voice willing to say no allowed sloppy operational habits and fraudulent intercompany lending to compound into systemic structural failures that threatened the entire company. When internal challenges to leadership are effectively outlawed, minor administrative errors inevitably snowball into multi-billion-dollar balance sheet catastrophes. The ultimate fallout of this total isolation did not merely destroy corporate balance sheets, but deeply compromised the personal dynamics, executive relationships, and ethical boundaries of the core leadership team living under one roof. At the absolute center of this insular circle was a tangled personal relationship between Chief Executive Sam Bankman-Fried and Caroline Ellison, the 27-year-old CEO of sister hedge fund Alameda Research. Together, these two young managers directed two interconnected multi-billion-dollar financial entities while engaging in an on-and-off romantic relationship inside the shared oceanfront penthouse. Personal romance, emotional vulnerability, and multi-billion-dollar corporate decisions became completely inseparable. Managing volatile quantitative hedge fund portfolios and customer funds became thoroughly entangled with personal relationship drama, rendering objective financial risk management and sound fiduciary judgment completely impossible for both young executives during critical market downturns. When erratic romantic dynamics combine with absolute, unaccountable control over billions in customer funds, systemic catastrophe is merely a matter of time. As the broader cryptocurrency market faced immense macroeconomic pressure and sharp liquidity contractions throughout 2022, these compromised personal bonds and toxic corporate arrangements were about to fracture completely under intense public pressure. Giant letters lit up the night sky over the huge basketball arena in Miami. FTX bought the rights to put its name on the stadium, spending hundreds of millions of dollars to paint its logo on basketball courts, race cars, and baseball uniforms. Famous sports stars and television actors were paid massive fortunes to look into the camera, smile, and tell regular families that this new money company was totally safe. Normal moms and dads sat on their couches at home, watching their favorite athletes tell them that trading digital coins was the smartest move they could ever make. Every time someone turned on the television or scrolled through their phone, the bright blue logo was right there. High-tech glowing signs lit up big city streets, making the company look as stable and trusted as a 100-year-old bank. It felt impossible to doubt a business that seemed to own every giant sports field and commercial break in the country. The bright lights masked the reality that the shiny building was entirely empty inside. While those giant stadium names made the company look completely safe, every single dollar spent on those glossy commercials came from money that was never supposed to be touched. The endless flood of marketing hid the truth that the company was spending cash faster than it could ever bring it in. Each new advertisement bought another layer of public trust while the actual bank accounts bled dry behind the scenes. These famous celebrities became shiny wrappers placed over a deeply broken toy. When ordinary people saw legendary champions and beloved stars talking about FTX, they did not see a risky gamble. They saw safety, strength, and success. People took the deep trust they had built up over years for their sports heroes and transferred it straight to a company they knew almost nothing about. Because their favorite heroes said everything was fine, millions of regular folks handed over their hard-earned life savings without asking hard questions. College students put in their tuition money, and grandparents deposited their retirement funds, believing that famous people would never trick them. They felt completely protected, unaware that their hard work was being spent behind their backs. Trusting famous faces meant regular people never checked the actual balance sheets, allowing the leaders to keep pulling cash out of customer funds completely unnoticed. That unearned trust gave the company total freedom to move into even bigger halls of power. Sam put on dark suits and flew on private jets to giant cities, walking right into the offices of powerful politicians and government leaders. He handed over millions upon millions of dollars to political campaigns and charity funds. He wanted everyone in power to see him as the responsible, smart young man who could help them write the rules for digital money. The leaders in power smiled, shook his hand, and welcomed him into private meeting rooms. They treated him like a boy genius who was helping shape the future of the entire world economy. Because he gave away so much cash and talked about doing good, nobody in high offices thought to ask for proof that the company was actually handling people's money safely. Buying the friendship of politicians gave the young leader a golden shield against government checks, making him seem untouchable. But no amount of political influence could fix the giant secret hole hidden inside the company's computer code. It is so easy for all of us to trust something just because it looks rich, famous, and powerful on television. When a company's name is plastered on giant building tops and endorsed by world-famous icons, our brains tell us that everything must be completely safe. We want to believe in the magic of massive success, forgetting that shiny posters are often used to hide ugly truths. Behind those glowing billboards, there were no real security systems or careful adult managers keeping watch. The glittering commercials acted like a thick curtain, keeping the public staring at the bright lights while the actual treasure chest was being quietly emptied in the dark. The grander the spectacle became on screen, the more dangerous the hidden reality grew on the inside. Those flashy television ads kept creating a false sense of security, pulling in new deposits every single day while hiding the terrible danger underneath. The illusion kept growing larger, but a business built on borrowed air cannot float forever. How long can a giant hollow balloon keep growing before it finally pops? For years, the young leaders blew more and more hot air into their giant creation, pretending that their made-up numbers were real gold. They believed they were so smart that the balloon would simply keep rising into the sky forever without ever touching the ground. They forgot that when a giant balloon is stretched completely thin, it takes only one tiny needle to pop the whole thing in a single second. Every dollar they borrowed and every rule they broke made the outer skin weaker and weaker. They were floating higher and higher above the ground, totally blind to how sharp the rocks below were going to be. That stretched balloon was floating on borrowed time, waiting for the wind to shift and burst the entire illusion apart. That shift arrived faster than anyone in the sunny offices ever expected, bringing cold reality crashing in. A freezing cold winter hit the digital money world as coin prices everywhere began to plummet. Small companies failed, panic spread across the internet, and people started pulling their money out of risky investments. Alameda Research had made massive, reckless bets that were now losing billions of dollars as the market fell deeper into the dark. As Alameda's bad investments collapsed into dust, the lenders who had loaned them money panicked and demanded their cash back immediately. Alameda did not have the cash to pay them, so they turned right back to the secret door inside FTX. The falling prices meant the fake coins they used as safety money were suddenly worth almost nothing, leaving the giant secret hole exposed to the entire world. The falling prices blew away the fog, forcing the young leaders to pull even more customer savings just to keep their secret trading shop alive for a few more days. The trap was closing fast, and there were no more shiny tricks left to hide the truth. By mid-2022, Alameda Research was drowning in massive debt obligations as nervous institutional lenders like Genesis and BlockFi demanded immediate loan repayments following the Terra Luna crypto crash. To prevent his private trading firm from collapsing, Sam Bankman-Fried systematically violated fiduciary duties by tapping directly into the digital vault of FTX, quietly funneling billions of dollars in real customer deposits directly to Alameda to satisfy those mounting, unpaid loans. This covert transfer of capital was hidden behind custom software code secretly written into the platform's core database, granting Alameda a virtually unlimited $65 billion credit line funded entirely by unsuspecting users. Everyday retail investors operating under the explicit promise that their assets were held in segregated accounts had no idea their life savings were being funneled through backdoors to subsidize disastrous hedge fund bets. The betrayal was total, converting what was aggressive venture marketing for a Tier 1 financial institution into a fraudulent, multi-billion-dollar shell game. Stolen user funds were repurposed to finance lavish real estate acquisitions across the Bahamas, undisclosed political action committee contributions, and speculative venture bets designed to mask catastrophic operational losses from auditors and board members. In early November 2022, the fragile illusion shattered when financial news outlet CoinDesk published a leaked balance sheet detailing the inner workings of Alameda Research. Journalist Ian Allison exposed a terrifying reality. Out of Alameda's reported $14.6 billion in assets, the vast majority was not backed by sovereign fiat or gold, but by billions of dollars in FTT, an illiquid utility token minted entirely out of thin air by FTX. The court-documented financial records revealed that Sam's twin financial empires were bound together in a circular feedback loop of phantom valuation. Mark-to-market accounting tricks artificially inflated the value of illiquid tokens to obscure deep operational deficits. If the market price of FTT dropped even slightly, Alameda's balance sheet would instantly implode, triggering margin calls that would reveal both firms to be hopelessly insolvent. Once that leaked balance sheet began circulating across Wall Street trading desks and Bloomberg terminals, the carefully constructed facade of quantitative genius disintegrated in a matter of minutes. Institutional backers who had poured hundreds of millions into Series C funding rounds suddenly realized that basic audit standards had been completely ignored in favor of unvetted founder hype. Inside the luxury executive suites at the Albany Resort in Nassau, a cold, paralyzing panic set in as corporate leadership realized the deception could no longer be contained. Every false statement made to external auditors, venture capital partners, and CFTC regulators was laid bare, triggering the sickening realization that their regulatory arbitrage scheme had run completely out of runway. There was no clever public relations campaign, slick pitch deck, or hand-waving explanation capable of manufacturing liquidity out of thin air. The overwhelming weight of impending criminal exposure hung heavy over the Bahamas headquarters, as the inner circle realized their systemic misappropriation of customer funds was about to destroy thousands of innocent lives around the world. The dam had broken, and no amount of frantic internal damage control or off-the-books ledger adjustments could stem the rapidly rising tide of market suspicion. Internal company chat channels erupted in chaos, external legal advisors began cutting ties, and key compliance officers prepared immediate resignations as whisper networks evolved into an open, unstoppable institutional alarm. As word spread across global social media networks, a desperate race began between Sam's public assurances and rapidly accelerating market terror. On November 7, 2022, the founder famously posted to Twitter that FTX and its assets were completely fine, attempting to project confidence while secretly knowing the platform was facing an unpayable multi-billion-dollar liquidity deficit. Everyday investors watched their phone screens in absolute agony, trapped in the torturous dilemma of whether to believe the pristine public image of crypto's darling or rush to withdraw their capital before the platform locked its doors forever. Across time zones, anxiety surged as blockchain telemetry began showing erratic, high-volume capital flows moving out of exchange wallets. Trust across the entire digital asset ecosystem dissolved completely over a single, nerve-shredding weekend. As institutional credit desks braced for massive counterparty defaults and systemic contagion spread through decentralized lending protocols, global liquidity froze solid, compounding market panic and forcing major market makers to pull their bids and flee high-risk digital asset platforms altogether. Recognizing extreme vulnerability, Changpeng Zhao, the chief executive of rival exchange Binance, dropped a bombshell on November 6, 2022, by publicly announcing his company would liquidate its entire holding of FTT tokens, worth roughly $530 million. That deliberate public declaration landed like a lit torch in a room packed with dry gunpowder, signaling to the world that FTX was facing immediate ruin. Binance's impending dump of hundreds of millions in FTT threatened to completely collapse the token's market price, instantly wiping out the primary collateral Alameda used to back its vast web of loans. In a desperate bid to preserve the floor, Alameda chief executive Caroline Ellison publicly offered to buy Binance's entire FTT block at $22 per token, exposing their acute vulnerability to open market selling. That decisive, aggressive strike by a rival corporate titan effectively triggered the terminal phase of FTX's corporate death spiral. By publicly exposing the utter fragility of Alameda's balance sheet collateral, Binance delivered a lethal financial checkmate that accelerated institutional capital flight, crushed market confidence, and rendered any potential emergency funding rounds or corporate rescue attempts completely dead on arrival. What followed was the digital equivalent of a classic 1930s bank run, playing out at the terrifying velocity of modern high-frequency fiber optic networks. Hundreds of thousands of anxious retail and institutional depositors logged into their mobile trading applications simultaneously, frantically hammering withdrawal buttons in a desperate effort to salvage their capital before the exchange's remaining liquid reserves vanished entirely. Over a brutal 72-hour window, users attempted to withdraw more than $6 billion from the platform. Because FTX had illegally transferred customer deposits to Alameda to cover bad debts, the exchange lacked the liquid cash necessary to fulfill the historic surge in redemptions, forcing leadership to freeze all customer withdrawals on November 8, 2022. Millions of ordinary people around the globe locked eyes with frozen screen interfaces, watching in helpless horror as their hard-earned life savings dissolved into a digital black hole. What was pitched as a revolutionary financial empire collapsed into a historic bankruptcy filing, leaving over 1 million creditors stranded in legal limbo, facing devastating personal losses caused by unbridled executive greed. On November 8, 2022, across the globe, glowing monitor screens suddenly locked up as red error codes filled web browsers. Regular people sat in quiet rooms, frantically clicking the withdrawal button over and over again while watching their account balances freeze in place. The digital vault was empty, and the glowing blue numbers on the screen were nothing more than pixels representing money that no longer existed. In offices and living rooms from London to Tokyo, the silence was shattered only by the desperate clatter of keyboard strokes as millions of users tried to rescue their funds. Over $6 billion in withdrawal requests flooded the system in just 72 hours. Every refresh of the page brought another failure message, locking people out of their life accounts while the trading engine quietly shut its doors. That sudden freeze on user screens was the direct physical result of a system that had already been drained completely dry days before the public ever noticed. The matching engine was not experiencing a technical glitch. It was choking on the reality that Alameda Research had secretly siphoned off customer deposits over months, leaving the exchange completely insolvent long before the panic began. Behind those locked screens lay the real human tragedy of families watching their entire financial futures disappear in seconds. A father who had spent 20 years saving for his daughter's college education watched his balance drop to zero with no phone number to call for help. A retired worker lost every penny set aside for medical care, while a young couple saw their home down payment vanish instantly. These were not high-stakes casino gamblers looking for a quick thrill, but ordinary people who had trusted a sleek app endorsed by famous athletes and blue-chip venture firms like Sequoia Capital. They believed their hard-earned cash was sitting safely in a regulated vault, completely unaware that their deposits were being funneled directly into high-risk directional bets made by a shadowy sister company. When the digital gates slammed shut, millions of everyday depositors were left holding worthless digital promises while their life savings vanished into the corporate abyss. The platform's terms of service had explicitly guaranteed that user funds belonged exclusively to the customers. Yet those legal promises proved completely meaningless when unsecured retail depositors were forced to line up behind institutional debt holders in bankruptcy court. The sheer scale of the disappearance left regulators and investors in complete shock as they realized $8 billion was simply gone. It had not just decreased in market value. The money had been systematically carved up and spent on terrible trading bets. $300 million in luxury Bahamian real estate, dark money political favors, and vanity sports sponsorship deals. Looking inside the company's financial core was like opening a safe only to find a handful of dust and forgotten notes written on scrap paper. The business lacked a basic chief financial officer, relied on consumer-grade software like QuickBooks for multi-billion-dollar accounting, and approved massive expense transfers through casual chat messages. The massive fortune that was supposed to anchor a world-changing exchange was a complete, total fiction. Tracking the ghost of that missing $8 billion exposed the brutal reality that the corporate treasury was never anything more than an illusion. The balance sheet was inflated with billions of dollars in self-issued FTT tokens and illiquid cryptocurrencies like Serum, manufactured out of thin air and marked to market at absurdly fake valuations that collapsed the second anyone tried to sell them. Inside his cluttered Bahamian penthouse in Albany, Sam Bankman-Fried paced back and forth in the middle of the night, his face lit by the cold glare of multiple phones. He worked the lines frantically, calling billionaire rivals, private equity giants, and sovereign wealth funds, practically begging anyone with available capital to wire emergency billions to plug the massive hole in his balance sheet. As the clock ticked toward dawn, the tone of the phone calls grew increasingly frantic and unhinged. Pitching a vision that was already burning around him, he tried to convince skeptical Wall Street executives that a quick $5 billion credit line or emergency bridge financing could fix what was actually a fatal structural collapse brought on by unmitigated commingling and illegal asset transfers. Those emergency midnight appeals were a desperate attempt to cover up years of secret money transfers before the entire financial industry realized the money was gone. Bankman-Fried had spent years routing customer fiat deposits into a secret entity called North Dimension, completely bypassing proper custodial segregation and creating a massive subterranean liability that eventually devoured the entire corporate enterprise. When potential rescuers finally demanded a look at the actual accounting records, they were met with complete horror. The financial statements were a chaotic mess of informal spreadsheets, unverified token valuations, and multi-billion-dollar holes where customer funds should have been sitting. When Binance chief executive Changpeng Zhao briefly signed a non-binding letter of intent, a mere 24 hours of basic due diligence exposed a colossal financial crater that no sane investor could ever fix. Rival leaders took one glance at the disaster, hung up the phone, and walked away immediately to avoid being dragged into the wreckage. No Wall Street firm, private equity fund, or crypto competitor was willing to touch a business whose financial records looked more like a crime scene than a corporate ledger, leaving the exchange stranded without a single life raft. The instant rejection by every major global investor proved that once the accounting magic was removed, The entire enterprise was radioactive. Federal law enforcement agencies, including the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice, were already preparing massive enforcement actions, making any corporate rescue deal a direct invitation to civil liabilities and immediate federal criminal indictments for whoever stepped into the fallout zone. The final moment came on November 11, 2022, in a quiet room with the signing of a single document that surrendered total control of the company. In just 5 short days, a $32 billion crypto empire disintegrated down to zero, bringing a swift end to one of the greatest corporate illusions in financial history. Veteran restructuring lawyer John J. Ray III was brought in to clean up the wreckage. As his signature hit the bankruptcy papers, the boy genius who promised to reshape global finance was forced to step down in utter disgrace. The grand vision of effective altruism and market revolution evaporated, leaving behind a ruined reputation, immediate fraud indictments in the Southern District of New York, and thousands of devastated lives across the globe. The sudden downfall of FTX permanently shattered the public's trust in crypto finance, triggering strict government investigations and changing corporate accountability laws forever. Regulators worldwide immediately moved to enforce strict proof of reserves requirements, stripped unmonitored executives of unchecked financial control, and permanently exposed the dangerous myth that charismatic tech founders could ever be trusted without rigorous fiduciary oversight and independent board governance. The immediate aftermath shifted the entire landscape of global crypto regulation in 2022. Financial watchdogs across the globe, from the Securities and Exchange Commission to the European Financial Conduct Authority, realized that voluntary disclosures and offshore registration in tax havens could no longer protect retail capital from catastrophic negligence. Regulatory immunity dissolved overnight as international governments moved to assert aggressive legal jurisdiction over cross-border digital platforms. Inside quiet suburban homes and overseas apartments, over 1 million ordinary depositors stared at frozen balance screens. Life savings meant for house down payments, retirement portfolios, and emergency medical care vanished into an unrecoverable Chapter 11 bankruptcy estate. These were not speculative high-frequency traders, but retail consumers who trusted polished marketing campaigns and institutional endorsements, only to watch billions in liquid assets turn into illiquid legal claims. The physical silence of empty corporate offices in Nassau stood in stark contrast to the financial wreckage left behind. As luxury penthouses at the Albany Resort were seized by authorities, personal dreams dissolved into thousands of complex court docket filings in Delaware. Victims were left to process the sobering realization that their deposited funds were never actually held in segregated accounts, but were simply gone. The structural collapse sent immediate shockwaves through the broader venture capital market. Prominent investment funds like Sequoia Capital, SoftBank, and the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan were forced to write down over $400 million to zero, exposing severe, systemic failures in their due diligence processes. Elite dealmakers had completely abandoned traditional oversight, rushing Series B and Series C funding rounds without requiring basic board oversight. In court filings from the Southern District of New York in early 2023, forensic accountants revealed that fundamental financial controls were completely absent. The company relied on informal messaging apps like Slack for million-dollar wire approvals and tracked billions in assets on basic accounting software. This terrifying revelation forced institutional investors to radically overhaul their risk management rules and governance requirements for all future tech investments. Yet, a fundamental question remains buried beneath the piles of federal court transcripts. Did the leadership team set out from day one to build a massive financial trap, or did they slowly slide into systemic deception when Alameda Research's trades turned catastrophically toxic? Tracing the timeline back to 2018 reveals an entity that began as a simple arbitrage play before devolving into a black hole of hidden leverage. Public records document the meteoric rise and sudden disintegration, but they cannot pinpoint the exact hour ambition transformed into deliberate theft. Encrypted signal chats titled Wire Fraud show executive awareness, yet the internal psychological transition from hyperbolic growth hacking to deliberate criminal breach of fiduciary duty remains an unanswered mystery of corporate pathology and human ego that no court trial can fully resolve. The legal precedent set by these federal criminal prosecutions created a permanent shift in how corporate boards manage founder accountability. Piercing the corporate veil exposed how executive privilege and supervoting share structures can no longer shield charismatic leaders from severe personal criminal liability when customer assets are commingled with proprietary trading desks to cover unhedged losses. Major financial institutions now demand verifiable cryptographic proof of reserves and continuous real-time auditing before offering wholesale liquidity. Prime brokers no longer accept unbacked platform tokens as balance sheet collateral. The era of unchecked blind trust in visionary founders came to a definitive, permanent end, replaced by rigorous, code-enforced verification and aggressive institutional risk mandates across global markets. For the hundreds of rank-and-file software engineers and operations staff who relocated to the Bahamas, the personal cost was immediate and devastating. Professional reputations were instantly tarnished by association, resumes were blacklisted across the tech industry, and many faced sudden termination alongside the total loss of their own personal savings held directly on the exchange platform. The emotional and operational toll extended to local charity organizations and global academic institutions that had accepted tens of millions in pledged philanthropic donations. When those funds were formally targeted for clawback by Chapter 11 bankruptcy trustees under federal preference rules, critical scientific research programs and community initiatives were abruptly stripped of their operational funding overnight. This systemic failure accelerated the passage of comprehensive digital asset legislation across major European and Asian financial centers. The European Union fast-tracked its markets in crypto assets framework, while Asian regulators enforced rigid legal firewalls mandating strict physical and operational separation between public exchange operations and affiliated market-making trading desks to eliminate structural conflicts of interest. Central banks seized upon the market contagion to strengthen their arguments for sovereign digital currencies. Leaders at the European Central Bank and the Federal Reserve highlighted the collapse as definitive proof of the inherent dangers posed by unbacked private tokens, using the regulatory vacuum to justify central bank digital currencies that could fundamentally reshape the architecture of global capital flows. Even with dozens of forensic liquidation teams deployed worldwide, asset recovery specialists still struggle to account for every missing digital token. A tangled network of offshore shell companies registered in Antigua, Switzerland, and the British Virgin Islands, combined with hundreds of millions drained in unauthorized midnight wallet transfers on November 11, 2022, left a fractured paper trail that remains partially obscured. Recovery teams continue to litigate how much capital will ultimately be returned to creditors after legal and restructuring fees consume hundreds of millions of dollars. The bankruptcy estate's monetization of artificial intelligence investments and liquidated tokens created an intense legal battle over whether claims should be settled based on depressed November 2022 asset prices or current market valuations. Ultimately, this institutional disaster shattered the core myth of Silicon Valley disruption. Multi-billion-dollar unicorn valuations, prestigious board advisors, and high-profile stadium naming rights proved to be absolutely no guarantee against basic corporate rot, missing ledgers, and shameless executive self-dealing that operated entirely in the open while auditors looked the other way. The legacy of this collapse serves as an enduring tragic warning about the danger of uncritical worship of perceived financial genius. When speculative hype, celebrity endorsements, and media adulation replace double-entry bookkeeping and basic corporate governance, vulnerable retail depositors invariably end up bearing the ultimate economic burden of unchecked leverage. Today, formal claims portals managed by court-appointed administrators allow international victims to submit documentation proving their lost account balances. Hundreds of thousands of claimants wait in multi-year legal queues, submitting bank records, government identification, and tax forms, desperately seeking fraction-on-the-dollar cash distributions calculated at the absolute bottom of the market cycle. For the ordinary retail investor in suburban Ohio or the small tech contractor in Nassau, the sudden insolvency in November 2022 was never just an abstract balance sheet adjustment in a Delaware bankruptcy court. When Sam Bankman-Fried froze withdrawals, over 1 million customer accounts vanished behind grayed-out login screens in a matter of hours. Families watched six-figure retirement funds and home down payments evaporate without recourse, while regional firms in the Bahamas that provided basic administrative services were left holding millions of dollars in unpaid invoices. The financial contagion tore through local economies, forcing small business owners to shutter operations and lay off workers who had never traded a single digital asset in their lives. When court-appointed trustee John J. Ray III finally stepped into the $30 million Orchid penthouse in the Albany Resort complex, he encountered no sophisticated risk controls or legitimate corporate oversight, only the abandoned remains of a multi-billion-dollar fraud. A solitary cluster of darkened trading monitors overlooked the Caribbean coast, marking the spot where a handful of 20-somethings managed an $8.7 billion deficit on an unencrypted group chat. The grand promises of effective altruism, high-speed financial innovation, and institutional legitimacy dissolved into a cold paper trail of criminal court filings, forged auditing reports, and federal indictments, proving that when an empire is constructed entirely out of leveraged illusions, it leaves behind only the deafening silence of what was stolen.